and the candidate with the most votes wins.
This fall, Seattle voters will be asked if they want to change how they select future mayors, city attorneys, and council members.
It's democratic because the candidate with the most support wins.
2 competing alternatives are on the ballot as well.
You can vote for me first and Betsy second.
We break down Seattle Proposition 1 and explain approval voting and ranked choice voting.
It opens up more voices.
And we hear from 2 places that have implemented these 2 systems.
Ranked choice has worked well for us in Maine.
The thing that we really loved about approval voting is that it's just very straightforward.
Before you cast your vote, advocates from both sides weigh in.
The votes are counted.
Making sense of Seattle Prop 1, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Up till now, Seattle voters have picked 1 candidate per race during our primary elections. But that may soon change, depending on what happens with Seattle Proposition 1 on November 8th. Pay attention, because how you vote will determine how the next Seattle mayor, city attorney, and city council get elected. This fall, Seattle voters will decide whether they prefer picking more than 1 candidate in future city primary elections, and which of 2 alternate voting systems they favor. On the ballot is Proposition 1, a 2-part question. The first question is, should we change the current voting system? Yes or no? The second question is, if the system is changed, do you favor 1A, which is approval voting, or 1B, which is ranked choice voting? More on those options later. But let's focus on that first question to begin. On November 8th, if the majority votes no to the first question, future Seattle city elections would stay the same. You pick your top candidate, and the top 2 vote-getters advance to the general election. But if the majority votes yes, what do Propositions 1A and 1B mean? Proposition 1A is a system called approval voting, and it works like this. Let's imagine the candidates are ice cream flavors. In the primary, you select as many flavors as you approve of, and the 2 most popular ones will advance to the general election. Proposition 1B is a system called ranked choice voting, and it works like this. In the first round, voters rank their favorite flavors from 1 to 5, if they like more than 1 flavor. Think of the second choice as a backup. Let's say your top choice is strawberry, but it's the least popular flavor and gets eliminated. Your second choice, pistachio, will get counted instead, so your vote isn't wasted. This process of elimination continues till 2 flavors are left. Voters will pick from one of those 2 flavors in the general election. So, will Seattle voters preserve the status quo or overhaul the current system and favor picking multiple candidates? Remember to weigh in on November 8th. To get some perspective on this possible change to Seattle's elections, we spoke with organizers in St. Louis, which has approval voting, and in Portland, Maine, where voters use a ranked choice system. It's a tale of 2 cities that are trying something new with the democratic process, and Seattle may not be far behind them.
Washington is totally broken.
Washington is broken.
Washington right now is broken.
Nationwide, a majority of people believe our political process has serious problems. Mallory Rusch says approval voting could be part of the solution, starting at the city level.
It passed really overwhelmingly here in St. Louis.
Rusch, executive director of the nonprofit Empower Missouri, helped Prop D pass with 68% of the vote in 2020. As voters supported the idea of choosing multiple candidates rather than being forced to pick just one.
It's just very straightforward. You vote for as many candidates as you want. The candidate with the most votes wins. It doesn't get much simpler than that.
This is called approval voting.
Supporters of approval voting, used in St. Louis and Fargo, North Dakota, say this system virtually eliminates spoiler candidates, the ones that can split the vote in our current plurality voting system, as it's called. Rusch says approval voting has made an impact in St. Louis, by encouraging candidates to find a middle ground and appeal to voters with progressive, moderate, or conservative politics.
When you are running a campaign in an election that is using approval voting, your job is to make your tent as big as possible.
Portland, Maine is also changing local elections, but with a different system.
The state of Maine is now using ranked choice voting.
People, once they start using ranked choice, like it and want to expand it to other offices.
Anna Kellar is executive director of the League of Women Voters in Maine and helped with the passage of ranked choice voting in Portland in 2010.
So how does it work?
The system, where voters rank their top choices in each position, has expanded to include the vote for governor and federal offices statewide. Kellar says ranked choice has prompted more candidates to run, creating 3- or 4-way races where more voices are heard.
And I think that has really enriched both the debate in those races as well as preparing people to run and serve for those offices who otherwise might have been shut out or discouraged from running.
Ranked choice voting is used in many more jurisdictions compared to approval voting. And Kellar says the research shows while RCV won't solve all the problems of politics, it's a good start.
Rather than just getting frustrated and writing off politics, let's try doing it in a different way.
But is Seattle ready for change?
Seattle has been willing to experiment with democratic processes.
Mark Smith is a professor of political science at the University of Washington, who says while Seattle voters have approved uncommon measures like democracy vouchers to support candidates, asking them to change the voting system entirely will be tricky.
It's often confusing the first time around.
Smith says the ranked choice option, because it's used in more jurisdictions, has been studied more closely.
You can vote for me first and Betsy second.
And in some cases, it's led to less negative campaigning and fewer attack ads.
You don't want to totally alienate the other one and their supporters because you want their second choice votes. So there's more incentive. What can you do rather than sort of tearing down the other candidates?
In Seattle, approval voting looked like it would be on the ballot by itself this fall, until a majority of the Seattle City Council pushed through an ordinance adding the ranked choice option for voters in July.
And I do think this is an appropriate action for the council to take.
Approval voting, if voters choose that option, would go into effect in 2025. Ranked choice by 2027, setting the stage this fall for elected officials to take a stand on the very way they're elected.
I think people will take cues from trusted figures within the city.
What cues will you take when it comes to the future of elections in Seattle? Get ready to cast a vote on the way you vote this November. So to explain more about Proposition 1 and specifically 1A and 1B, we have with us Jazmine Smith. She is political manager of the Washington Bus, speaking in favor of ranked choice voting, and Logan Bowers, co-chair of the Seattle Approves campaign, which supports approval voting. So we've explained on this show how approval voting and ranked choice voting work, and we've put a spotlight on 2 cities that are using those different systems right now. So let's focus on Seattle at this point. Logan, I will go to you first. If voters decide to change the city's election system, why is approval voting the right choice compared to ranked choice?
Yeah, so we started the Seattle Approves campaign in 2020. We wanted to make elections in Seattle as fair, as equitable, as representative as possible. And so we looked across the country to find what were the groundbreaking voting reforms going on. And what we found was an amazing group of folks in St. Louis that had just passed a new reform, approval voting, and put it to use in their local elections. And what we saw was, we saw folks, supporters there saying amazing stuff, like approval voting will make sure most voters actually support the winning candidate. I'm proud to support approval voting, so our representatives worked hard to earn our votes. That was Representative Cori Bush, member of the squad. And we saw that representative power play out. The city elected a black woman mayor for the first time in its history, which is pretty groundbreaking for that city. And we saw this is the best voting system currently in use in the country. So we said, let's bring it to Seattle. We went to work. 43,000 signatures later, it's appeared on the ballot.
Okay, all right, and we'll get to that other piece of it with the ballot piece next. But Jazmine, similar question to you. If voters say yes to Prop 1, why should they choose ranked choice over approval voting?
Ranked choice is the most representative. The
best, most proven system that there is. It's used in 53 jurisdictions. It'll be on 50 in the next election. And it's just been shown to be the best way to show how people feel and how they want to vote.
Yeah, and rank their choices too.
Exactly.
I did want to point out there's a difference in terms of when these programs would be implemented. 2025. Can we go into that briefly, please?
Yeah, August 2025 would be the most likely timeline for both of them because our system needs to go through, since there would be a change regardless, then it wouldn't be automatic. It wouldn't be as soon as 2023 is likely, but it wouldn't be necessarily as late as 2027. It's just kind of like overshooting by 2027 on that end. Yes.
Yeah, let me have Logan jump in.
Yeah, so the two propositions as written, 1A could be as late as 2025, 1B could be as late as 2027. We actually believe Proposition 1A is implementable for 2023. And the reason is because it is so simple. It works with the existing ballot design. It works with the existing certified voting software. Already supports it out of the box. And in St. Louis, it only took 4 months to implement. So we're optimistic that we can get that as early as the next election.
Okay.
The difference is that we have more robust laws and we would actually have to do more testing regardless, and voter education for both. You should still do voter education on both ranked choice and approval voting, regardless of which goes through.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll definitely jump into that piece in a little bit, Jazmine. Logan, I want to go back to you, though, and talk about this. Approval voting used in only 2 cities in the U.S., St. Louis, Missouri, Fargo, North Dakota. RCV, as Jazmine telling us, used in more than 50 jurisdictions, has been studied much more. What's your response to the critique that approval voting is an untested system?
Yeah, I mean, none of these voting systems are new. They've actually all been around for hundreds of years, and they've all been used in kind of the distant past. And there's plenty of evidence to show that they work. It's only in the recent American cities, that we're choosing what to adopt. I would say it's kind of like, if you had a Windows phone in 2007 when the iPhone came out, there were more Windows phones in the world. But when something new and better comes along that's more representative, approval voting delivers more accurate results relative to the will of the voters. And it does so without disenfranchising voters with a complex ballot. So the more complex description in the opening segment, you can see research shows that disenfranchises somewhere between 2 and 4% of voters. The ballot's so much more complicated. In Seattle, it would have somewhere between 80 and 256 ovals for a mayoral race.
Okay.
That you lose voters. And the effect gets worse the bigger the race. So, in Seattle, where we have 15-way races, that effect could be as high as 8%. So the nice thing about approval voting is you don't get that drop-off in voter turnout, but you get even more representational power. So we want something better.
I feel like there's a representation here with regard to how this is being explained with ranked choice voting. Please go ahead. This disenfranchisement piece that Logan brought up.
I would say that there's more enfranchisement when people know that their vote isn't wasted. And New York saw, I believe, 10% increase in voter turnout by people who may have known that their favorite wasn't going to make it through, but they could still vote for them and then show that preference for other folks as well, and that it doesn't actually trip people up as much as is being portrayed. And 95% of New Yorkers said that ranked choice voting was simple, and Alaskans in that last election, 85% said that it was simple to use.
Okay.
The disenfranchisement comes from the other 15% that had a hard time.
Okay. Did you have any thoughts about this disenfranchisement piece? I know you touched on it. I just wanted to have you have a response if you'd like.
It's not necessarily disenfranchisement if they say that it wasn't necessarily that simple. I would say that getting more people to turn out and show up is enfranchising those voters. And I think that when more communities of color are turning out and are utilizing ranked choice voting, then that's more representative, and that when compared to approval voting, then we saw that communities of color were less likely to engage with approval voting and just do bullet voting, which is where you just do the one because you know that voting for multiple people will dilute your vote or show that, or it'll hurt your favorite, whereas you can still vote for your favorite with ranked choice voting.
Okay, got it. I'm going to try to move on from
Yes,
that because I
sorry.
think we covered that very well. But Logan, I'll jump back to you and get into some nitty gritty here. So approval voting as I-134 looked like it would be on the ballot by itself a few months ago, but the Seattle City Council decided to add the ranked choice voting for voters too. What was your response to that decision?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really important to be careful when you're manipulating the system by which you're elected. So I think it's a little shocking that the City Council would choose to draft a bill in 2 days and pass it without consulting any experts. There's many different kinds of ranked choice voting. You know, there's some are better, some are worse. You know, the Portland, for example, has an RCV proposal that looks nothing like Seattle's, and in fact avoids many of the pitfalls that the council proposal has. So I'm a little surprised that they would propose rewriting their own election rules, you know, faster than they would rename a post office.
Okay. Jazmine, some thoughts on this. Did the council rush this through to get RCV on the ballot? Why didn't ranked choice voting gather signatures and pursue an initiative campaign of its own?
Because we were working in Olympia. We were doing the work for local options on 5584 with Senator Trudeau, and that's where our focus was during the legislative session and getting ranked choice voting for communities across Washington. And so when the City Council went through the correct process that's laid out in the charter of when you have an initiative, you can also have a competing proposal, then that's what they did and absolutely support it. And I agree with what was said by council members that when we're engaging with democracy, then the voters should have all of the options in front of them, just not the one that got in front of them first.
Okay. And Logan, I think I want to keep going down this path here that Jazmine's alluding to. When the council looked at I-134, Andrew Lewis pointed out that if Seattleites chose approval voting in 2022, that would potentially set up a non-conforming system with King County, where Councilmember Zahalai and others are working to pass ranked choice voting in 2023. How do you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, people have been proposing voting reform measures for 25 years now, and they're all hypothetical, right? Throughout that whole time, we're still using the same voting system, well, now about 18 years or so. So, you know, we put I-134, Proposition 1A, on the ballot because we wanted something that was legal, that was simple, easy to use, easy to understand, and would give us as much representational power right now. I think there's interesting things to do in Olympia that can create better reforms in the future. But the reality is Proposition 1B didn't appear until Proposition 1A was already on the ballot because, as I said, there's many different forms of what the council proposed, and they kind of picked the one that they could slap on in 2 days, which doesn't have the advantages, and we haven't had the chance to scrutinize it. And that's why, like a national voting reform, like open primaries, wrote a letter to the council opposing it, saying this was not good democracy.
Okay. Jazmine, some thoughts about this, what Logan's bringing up with regard to how the council did this and this idea of the work you've been doing in Olympia, too.
When we have a tested and proven system that's been showing up all over, and there's different versions. The Portland version it will be different than the Portland, Maine version, will be different from the Alaska version, and we all have this evidence of how it works and that it works better, and just reject the premise that it's not good democracy to let voters choose what they prefer.
Got it. Are you concerned that if proofs did pass, if 1A did pass here, that it would set up a non-conforming system? Is that part of your concern?
Absolutely, and that it could pass and then be facing a legal challenge for the Washington Voting Rights Act as well, because while ranked choice voting has been tested against voting rights legislation, then or approval voting has not, and we've stood the test and stand up, but with Washington's Voting Rights Act, then we just don't know, and there could be that legal challenge. And with Yakima, then ranked choice voting was identified as a potential remedy too. Voting Rights Act violations.
Interesting.
And having a representative democracy.
Thank you. This legal piece, I want to make sure we dive into it briefly. Logan, your response to what Jazmine's saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pure kind of scaremongering. We've looked at the local laws. We used a legal firm to help us navigate that to make sure it conformed with Washington state laws. It absolutely does. We looked at places across the country that 2 other cities have adopted it, and it's been smooth sailing for years now. And the reason it's completely smooth sailing for them is because it's unambiguously legal. There's just no substance to it.
Okay. I'm going to move on to another topic here, if I may. And I wanted to raise a concern here about money. And let me go to you here first, Logan, here. I talked to King County Elections about this. They told me that no matter which option is chosen, if voters do decide to change our system here in Seattle, it's going to cost a significant amount, from process changes to election worker training to extensive voter education. We're going to have some state-level costs, too, apparently. The Secretary of State will have to weigh in on voter intent rules, ballot certifications, and some other issues, too. I want to get an idea for this, Logan. How much will it cost to implement approval voting? What's your message to taxpayers on this?
Yeah, the message is that it costs essentially nothing. Now, the King County does do its kind of educational piece, which they do for every election cycle. Mm-hmm. So there is that piece, and all reforms will have that. If you look at the fiscal note on the Proposition 1B, it costs an extra $4 million per election. Proposition 1A, what we proposed, does not. And the reason it does not is because the ballot design stays the same, the voting software stays the same. None of that changes. The ballot is physically smaller because, again, it only has, for the last mayoral race, for example, it only has 16 ovals instead of 80 or 256. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so our option is definitely the low-cost option versus $4 million in election minimum is the fiscal note from the Proposition 1B.
Okay. Your thoughts on this, Jazmine, about how much this is going to cost people?
In Maine, then it costs $100,000 to implement, and studies have shown that the cost that's proposed for ranked choice voting just isn't the actual cost. It's way higher. Like one jurisdiction that enacted it, it was 1/14 of the cost. I believe that was New York. But A, overshoot and have it cost less. B, it wouldn't necessarily have 256 ovals. Mm-hmm. It would have 5. The voting vendor that we use in King County already is able to have ranked choice voting. It would simply be the software and the voter education piece on both ends of what we need to upgrade the system and fix it.
Okay, thank you. And Logan, just another quick money question here. Talk to me about the funding for the campaign for Seattle Approves. I know some people have raised some questions about where these dollars are coming from. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, we started with the premise, we looked around the country and we found a voting system that looked amazing, that folks were championing. Then we did polling in Seattle, and we went to voters. We just said, hey, this is what it is. Yeah. This is how it works. Would you like it? And polling came back, our first poll came back 72% of voters supported moving to approval voting. Mm-hmm. And so we said, okay, great. This is a good system. The voters want it. Let's go see if we can raise some money to do it. So we went to national voting groups that are interested in voting reform, that are interested in strengthening democracy, and we wrote grants and we requests, and we said, hey, we have a system here that needs reform. We have voters that want that reform. Will you help us strengthen democracy in Seattle? And so, and a couple of different groups stood up and said, yeah, we'll help you with that. And so that's how that came to be. And we beat out other cities also seeking those grants because we were able to demonstrate Seattle voters wanted it.
Thank you. Some thoughts about how these campaigns are funding, how your campaign is funded, if you want to talk about that, please. Who are the supporters, I guess, of RCV?
There's a lot of organizations that, again, have already been doing the work, that are advocating for ranked choice voting. We don't have a big think tank that's dumping a lot of money in from out of state, but we are just community organizers with community support that are talking about the issues. We've got Washington Community Alliance, Washington for Equitable Representation, Northwest Progressive Institute, the Washington Bus in support of ranked choice voting.
Got it. briefly some of the different people that support your campaign, please?
Yeah, we have the Equal Vote Coalition, Seattle Invisible, Open Primary is also supported relative to the two propositions, our proposition.
Thank you. I want to make sure I covered that piece. Here's a big question, and Jazmine, maybe I can start with you here. I've talked to advocates on both sides of this issue, and they've told me either choice here, 1A or 1B, would be a much welcome change as opposed to our current system here. But from what I've seen in the research, Seattle's in a bit of a unique system where both systems are on the ballot this fall. Are you concerned that with all the campaigning going on between approval voting and ranked choice voting, voters might get overwhelmed, a little too confused, and say no to both options?
I'm not necessarily worried about that, just because what I hear from community members is that folks are really concerned about our elections and recognize that there needs to be a change. And so when posed with that first question, top of the ballot, almost, it is like, yeah, our elections do need to change. And with all of the conversations about ranked choice voting, whether that's at the state level, at King County level, and across the nation, then I think that it's a really easy choice.
Okay. We'll get into a closing statement in just a minute there, but I did want to talk about this confusion question, Logan. Do you have concerns about that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think there's a real risk there, and I hope folks will still support Proposition 1A. We could spend a whole hour on just one of the two voting systems and still have questions. And so it's really important to think these things through, because this is our democracy on the line, right? And I think it's telling that when the council passed their alternative, 3 of the council members said essentially, I don't want either to pass, or I question whether we need this at all. Which I think, to your point about making it harder to make that decision, is definitely troubling.
Yeah, Seattle's going to be looking to its leaders on this for some guidance, and we'll see what happens there. It is time to wrap up, and if we can keep this brief, that would be great. But Logan, some final thoughts here, final word to voters about what you want them to understand about Prop 1 and specifically Prop 1A.
Yeah, I think the thing about Prop 1A is it delivers the most representative voting system we can have within our current election rules. It keeps things simple. It does not leave any voters behind in the service of trying to make the elections more representative, and it does so cost effectively. And I think those are key. It's key to keep things straightforward so everyone understands what's going on.
Got it. Jazmine, some final thoughts here for people watching this.
Yeah, I am really excited to support Proposition 1B, ranked choice voting, because it allows for that voter preference. It allows for us to have our most representative democracy and have more representation along the lines. It keeps things simple for future jurisdictional changes with King County and the state, and I'm really excited that we can have better elections in a really simple and effective way and join the rest of the world in embracing ranked choice voting.
Okay, thank you both for this input here, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about ranked choice voting and approval voting? One group writes, with approval voting, you have the power to fully express your opinion about every candidate on the ballot. No more limiting your voice. Another says, in a ranked choice voting, candidates need to think twice before going negative. Niceness is a good electoral strategy. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next week, the race to represent Seattle's 37th Legislative District in Olympia. Chapalo Street and Amijah Smith are in a close race for the open seat vacated by Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley, and they'll join us right here to debate why they should win your vote. That's on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.